Every single choice we make, from the coffee we drink to the way we get to work, has this invisible link to our planet's resources. Today, we're going to pull back that curtain and really look at the story behind all the stuff we use every single day.
So let's start with a big, personal question. How much of the planet do you actually use? It sounds like a massive, unanswerable question, right? But believe it or not, there's a way to measure it. And it's called the ecological footprint. The easiest way to think about it is like your own personal slice of Earth, a plot of land big enough to produce all your food, supply all your materials, and absorb all your waste. It's a really powerful way to see your impact in a tangible way. So what's the number? Well, here in Canada, the average person's footprint is about 8.28 hectares. To put that in perspective, that's like needing more than 8 football fields just to support one person's lifestyle for a year. That is way bigger than the footprint of someone living in, say, Japan or Italy.
And where does that huge number come from? Well, it's basically our daily lives. Look at this. Food makes up the biggest chunk, a full 30%. Then you've got our homes and how we get around not far behind. It's kind of wild that the most basic parts of our day carry the biggest environmental price tag.
Okay, so understanding our footprint is one thing, but what happens when we get it wrong? What happens when the resources we completely depend on start to, run out? Let's dive into a couple of pretty sobering cautionary tales from right here in our own backyard.
Picture this. It's 1994, and a cornerstone of Canada's economy and culture just vanished. The Grand Banks, once so full of cod it was thought to be limitless, completely collapsed. The government had to declare a total ban on fishing, which absolutely devastated coastal communities and put thousands of people out of work almost overnight.
So how on earth did this happen? It was basically a perfect storm of bad factors. You had new tech like sonar that made it ridiculously easy to find fish, and massive factory ships that could fish 24/7. Add in destructive methods like dragnets that tore up the ocean floor, and top it all off with government quotas that were way too high and barely enforced. It was a recipe for disaster.
And this story of mismanagement isn't just limited to our oceans. If we look at our forests, we see a really similar conflict playing out between profit and sustainability. It basically boils down to two very, very different ways of doing things.
This table just lays out the dilemma perfectly. On one hand, you have clear cutting. It's fast, you get a ton of wood, and it makes the most money. But it completely destroys habitats and can lead to things like landslides. On the other hand, you have selective cutting. It's way better for the ecosystem, but it's slow and just not as profitable. It's that classic battle, short-term gain versus long-term health. Now these stories, the fisheries, the forests, they aren't just isolated incidents or a few bad decisions. They're actually symptoms of much bigger, often invisible systems that are constantly driving our choices and shaping our world. Let's start with a big one, the atmosphere. I'm sure we all remember the basics of the greenhouse effect from school. But the absolutely crucial thing to understand now is how our massive reliance on fossil fuels has supercharged this natural process, trapping way more heat than it should and seriously altering our climate.
Okay, now let's switch gears to an economic system. Let's talk about tariffs. It sounds like a boring economic term, but it's pretty simple. It's just a tax government puts on stuff coming into the country. The idea is to make foreign goods more expensive so you're more likely to buy products made right here at home.
But what happens in the real world? Well, check out this case study. You've got two competing companies, one in the US, one in Canada. Under free trade, they're both doing great, but then a 25% tariff gets slapped on. And look what happens. Both of their profits just tank. The US company loses almost 24%, and the Canadian one gets hit even harder, losing over 28%. You can see it right here, plain as day. The crazy thing is, the whole point of the tariff was supposedly to protect the domestic company. But in the end, everybody lost. Both companies were way worse off than they were with free trade. It seems like nobody really won. And here's the kicker, the part that's so easy to miss. The companies don't just eat those costs. Nope, they pass them right along to us, the consumers. The prices of goods go up. So a tariff is really just a hidden tax on everybody, which can make it even tougher for people to afford sustainable options when every dollar counts. Okay, so with all these heavy challenges, it's easy to feel a bit overwhelmed, right? But here's the good news. This isn't about stopping progress or going back in time. It's about getting smarter. It's about making better choices and finding sustainable ways to move forward. The whole guiding principle for this shift is called sustainable development, and it's a beautifully simple idea. It just asks, how can we get what we need today without wrecking the planet for our kids and grandkids so they can't get what they need tomorrow? It's all about finding that balance.
A huge, and I mean huge piece of that puzzle is how we power everything. And the choice is becoming incredibly clear. Do we keep relying on fuels that will eventually run out, or do we switch to sources that are essentially infinite?
The options are right here. On one side, you have renewables, like solar and wind. They just keep on coming. On the other side, you have non-renewables, like fossil fuels. Once they're gone, they are gone for good. The choice we make between these two will pretty much define what our future looks like.
And this same kind of thinking applies to all the stuff in our lives. We all know about recycling, right? But in the modern approach to waste, recycling is actually only the third best thing you can do. It's better to reuse things. And the single most powerful, most important step of all, it's right there at the top. Just reduce. Consume less in the first place.
So if we have the solutions, renewable energy, smarter ways to handle waste, what's the holdup? Why aren't we moving faster? Well, this is where it gets really personal. Because it seems the biggest barrier isn't technology or politics, it's us.
Why is it so hard for us to act, even when we know the facts? Well, our own brains can kind of work against us. We look for information that confirms it's not our problem. We think of it as something for the future, not for right now. There's social pressure. Well, my friends aren't changing, so why should I? And honestly, the whole thing can feel so huge and complex that it's easy to just feel powerless and tune out. And all of that really boils down to one final, pretty profound moral question. And I'll just leave you with this to think about. If you know for a fact that a problem is going to be irreversible in, say, 20 years, but you probably won't feel its absolute worst effects in your own lifetime, do you still have an obligation to help solve it right now?